welcome everyone who's just joined. I think there's a few people who are still connecting to the audio, but it looks like people are still coming in, which is great. Welcome to the third webinar in our series. So JGA Group are running a series of lunch and learn webinars at the moment, looking at one of the big topics of the day, which is about how COVID-19 is disrupting marketing and sales. And the reason why these webinars are being run by JGA is to really bring people together, whether it's learners, whether it's alumni, whether it's other people in the JGA community, to get everyone thinking about how the world of business and in other sectors is changing because of this enormous shift, which is probably one of the biggest transitions that any of us will see in our lifetime. And today we're going to look at a topic which I think is particularly pertinent and one of the big challenges that many organisations will have wrestled with over the last couple of months, which is how on earth you get your products and services to people at a time of such transition, not just in supply chains, but also in the way that we would historically have interacted with customers and other stakeholders. I've got two fantastic panellists who we will be exploring this with today, who I'm going to introduce you to in a moment. A couple of points on webinar protocol, just two things to recommend to make the session run extra smoothly. I can see quite a lot of you have got your cameras on already, which is wonderful. Would recommend that those of you who don't have them on, if you can, I know certain people might have connectivity issues, bandwidth issues, but if you can, it's quite nice for everyone to see everyone else's faces. We also recommend that when other people are talking, if you could put yourself on mute, that's always greatly appreciated. And we do encourage people to talk and discuss during the webinar, particularly when we get to the Q&A and some of the exercises that we'll be doing. You can either put your hand up physically and Jubril and I will look out for you and make sure that you are heard and that you have a chance to contribute. Or equally, if we want to use the reactions button, which is right at the bottom of the screen, you're very welcome to do that as a way of putting your hand up. And the webinar protocol builds on the event protocol, which you'll have had in your joining instructions. So we're delighted to have you all here today to explore this topic. You might have seen that we sent you out a food for thought question, which was about distribution. And before we come to that, because we're really interested to hear some of the changes that you've been making, I thought it might be quite interesting to try and take the temperature amongst you all and to find out what has changed for you. So my question for you all is, and I'm going to give you the options in how to answer this in a moment, is whether the way that you have distributed your products and services to customers, whether that has changed at all over the last couple of months. Option A is totally changed. Option B is a few changes and C is no change at all. So option A, totally changed. Option B, a few changes, and C, no change at all. So I'd like you to choose either A, B or C and put that into box. Jill has already done it. Thank you, Jill. Oh, lots of B's coming in so far. Very good. I think this one is going to be a mix of A's and B's. Lovely. Great. I think the B's just have it at the moment. And quite a few A's coming in as well. A few more B's. Very good. So those of you who are A's, would someone like to share an example of the changes that they've made?
Okay, I'll go.
Go for it, Andrea.
So on one side of the work that I do, I'm a Reiki practitioner, and what I would normally do is offer Reiki treatments in person because it's a hands-on sort of healing system. But it's also possible to give Reiki distantly. So obviously it's been a total change, no in-person treatments. So I've done that online or through a distance. Yeah, so sending it distantly, either with a person online or offline. So that's a complete change.
Brilliant, Andrea. Looking forward to hearing more about that today. Thank you for sharing that. And we've got a few Bs as well amongst the responses. Shakira, I see that you've put B down. Do you want to tell us a bit about some of the changes that you've made?
So I'm an apprentice, and so in our organisation we've sort of changed how we interact with our residents. So I work for Peabody Housing, and I've noticed a lot more things has to get signed off and things like that when we're sort of looking at content and things. So yeah.
And is that something that's taking extra time? And and I think that's one of the challenges, isn't it? As we move to do more stuff digitally, then often that means there's extra content that needs to be reviewed, and in particular, I guess where you're providing services as well, those safeguarding issues need to be factored in, which I imagine is a reason behind the sign off.
Definitely.
Great. So some fantastic examples there, and I think we're going to find that this issue is affecting businesses of all sizes, organisations in all sectors, and I'm delighted that we've got two fantastic panellists to be hearing more from today. So I'm going to introduce them. So Andrea Cunningham, who you saw share some thoughts earlier, is a chartered marketer with broad marketing experience promoting products and services for organisations in a variety of industries such as publishing, media, not-for-profit, education, travel, construction, and currently insurance. Recently, part of her role included managing corporate hospitality and events to help build relationships with clients and make new business contacts. Andrea is also a Reiki master practitioner, as you heard earlier, so looking forward to hearing more about that, and a holistic interior designer who's in the process of adapting wellbeing therapies and services that can be delivered online or in a different way due to the coronavirus outbreak. Andrea, welcome. Looking forward to talking to you all today. And joining Andrea is Deborah Armitage. She is a change management consultant who specialises in helping large global businesses get their employees ready, willing and able to adapt to change. So absolutely critical at the moment. Over the past 20 years, she has worked with some of the world's most famous brands, including major banks such as Barclays and HSBC, the oil and gas giant Shell, the owner of Guinness, Smirnoff, Gordon's Gin, Diageo, as well as household names in the telecoms, media and publishing businesses. Recent projects include helping a law firm float on the London stock market and a major NHS trust adopt new technology to enable its people to communicate more effectively during the COVID-19 pandemic. Welcome, Andrea and Deborah.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for joining us today with all that wonderful experience. I'm really looking forward to hearing a bit more about some of the changes that you've seen over the last couple of months. Deborah, shall we start with you? Do you want to share some thoughts on what you've seen change in terms of distribution for the organisations that you've worked with?
Yes. I'm going to say something a little radical. I don't think I'm necessarily seeing a change. I'm seeing an acceleration. So I think a lot of the things that are happening are trends that were already happening. They're just happening faster. So I think if we look at the way the world's moving, we're generally moving from a sort of high touch economy to a low touch economy. So I don't know if anybody remembers Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and what Charlie Bucket's dad used to be the man screwing on toothpaste caps in the factory. You know, that's a very high touch economy, very manual, you know, some hands-on, go in a box, someone else touch it, someone else touch it, someone else touch it until you pick it up from a shop. And I think what we're seeing is obviously that start to kind of erode. I mean, you know, we're seeing COVID-19 has accelerated the collapse of the high street, for instance. So, you know, we've already seen, I'm sure many of us, you know, see our local high streets in an increasing state of disrepair, kind of, you know, familiar retailers are disappearing. I think that's just been accelerated. The move to digital is being accelerated. And in the space I work in, I talk a lot about cloud, which is digital in another word, which basically means you can access the information you need from anywhere. You don't have to be tethered to a particular device. You don't have to be, you know, your servers, and your data center doesn't have to be in a particular place, it can be anywhere. So some of the work I've been doing recently is about kind of freeing up an NHS trust. So if you imagine a GP in a surgery, I'm sure, hopefully, well, not hopefully, but probably everyone's been to see a GP at least once. You know, the GP's got a computer next to them, they can see your records, that's great. You imagine that in a massive hospital, and you're talking to a doctor, and the doctor wants to look at your records. The doctor invariably has to run back to a particular station, to a particular computer somewhere on the ward to look it up. And so some of the work I've been doing is helping a trust free that up so that they can actually get patient records, they can access patient information from wherever they are on whatever device they choose. And for a lot of people in a lot of businesses, that's kind of fairly straightforward, that's already happening. I don't know if anyone uses the Microsoft products, the Office products. Those of us who are a bit older will remember, you know, you used to have to download them, you'd get a CD-ROM, you'd have to install it on your computer. Now all you do is you log in. You can be on any device, you just log in. You log in via an app, you log in via your iPad, you know, you log in on a laptop. And I think seeing more and more of that coming, and I think businesses that have been very slow to adopt that sort of cloud-based thinking are really starting to move a lot faster. So a lot of places that were very reluctant to let their employees work from home have been forced to, and that therefore they've been forced to rethink about the cloud and how they use it. And so one of the interesting consequences of the cloud is that if you no longer own your IT equipment, if you no longer pay for the software to be installed on people's computers, you're always renting it effectively. Call it software as service. I'm sure everyone's come across that term. But what that's doing is it's giving an awful lot of power to these big tech giants. And I think that's one of the things as well, that's another trend that's coming through the COVID is actually, you know, the big tech giants are getting more and more powerful as we rent more from them and we bring more from the cloud, and it's strengthening their position. Someone's laughing away, Mr. Aldred is giggling away to himself. Okay, so I think those are some of the things we're seeing. I mean, I give a couple of other kind of really interesting examples. I mean, how there's certain businesses really having to think about how they move online. So I know a poet, so someone who actually makes their living through poetry, which is an amazing thing to do, but how they actually make their living is through live events and through selling the books at the live events. Now those live events no longer exist, so they've effectively seen their income disappear overnight. So I think one of the areas that's really, really going to struggle, even though the demand has got even bigger, is arts and entertainment. So, you know, how do these live events that we all loved, you know, because live events are really how musicians make their money. You know, you don't get any money from streaming. You know, no one sells physical albums anymore. So how can we rethink sort of the live experience, that's concerts, that's festivals, that's theatre? Because, you know, with us all being trapped at home, and I assume everybody thinks like I do that we may have future lockdowns as well. You know, we might get out of this one and come back in again in a couple of months. With everybody being trapped at home, our desire for arts content is huge. But actually, you know, it's very, very difficult to monetize when it's digital. So I think that's a really interesting area that we're going to have to see how that plays out over the next year or so. And I'll give one final example of a business I work with. It's a fascinating business. Did anybody here learn to read with Biff, Chip and Kipper books? Or did they teach their children to read with Biff, Chip and Kipper? Okay, so you'll know this. They're published by a wonderful business called Oxford University Press that I think is one of Britain's oldest businesses. It's about 500 years old. It's a very fantastic business. And Oxford University Press has been on this sort of digital transformation journey for a number of years. But if you think about an educational publisher, you know, sort of 10, 15 years ago, you would publish a nice big thick textbook. And it was lovely, you know, nice big solid thing. And, you know, the students would have it, they'd have it in their lockers, they'd have to carry it around. But how then do you move that to digital? So are people willing to pay the same for a digital textbook as for a physical textbook? And actually, interestingly, people aren't, even though it's actually more expensive to produce a digital textbook. That sounds surprising, but it's more expensive. You've still got to do all the same work up front. You've got to do the same research. You've got to pay the author. You've got to break it into pages. But people want to pay less because it's not the same physical product. And also what Oxford University Press is seeing as well is, I don't know if anyone had a textbook at school and maybe you used about 2 chapters in it ever. It was a great thick book and you used about 2 chapters and you were like, oh God, why do I have to carry this around? We'd never use it. So then people suddenly saying, well, actually, I don't want to pay for the whole digital book. I just want to pay for those 2 chapters that we're going to teach on. So then how, the challenge of someone like that educational publisher, how do they then take that content? They've got to create all of it, up front, but then people just want to buy it in little bits. And so I think that's kind of, a really interesting journey that's, again, being accelerated as more and more, as children and students are learning now at home, that journey for the educational publishers into that kind of properly digitized content, and the challenges of doing that and monetizing it properly are really interesting and also really, really difficult.
Thanks so much, Deborah. That was fascinating, and so many big questions there about the trade-offs that organisations will need to make, and the questions they'll have to ask themselves as they think about these different points in the supply chain, and of course how you monetize it, or what people are prepared to pay for it. Thinking back to last week's webinar, so thank you, that was very helpful, lots of food for thought to get us thinking. Andrea, I know you've got lots of great experience really thinking about how distribution has had to change, and a wonderful story of your own as well around the Reiki side of things. It would be brilliant to hear about some of the changes that you've seen over the last couple of months.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I wanted to mention, and we kind of talked about it before. In the education system, there are a lot of university students who might be starting their first year in September, and there are quite a few universities that might not actually open to face-to-face teaching in September. We don't know, everything's obviously uncertain, but it's making them question whether they actually start their first year or whether they do a gap year. And if they do start their first year, are they going to pay the full £9,000 fees for something that's not quite the experience they were expecting? As in, not having Freshers Week, not having that social interaction, not living away from home and having all those experiences. And being taught online, which is completely different. So there's a lot of questions around that. And then if there are some children who are in private schools, will they continue, will parents continue with that? And they'll also be looking at the cost of that and what they're getting for their money. And same with state schools as well. It's how, if we are going to keep going in and out of lockdown, how a teacher's going to, teach children online more effectively. Because I've been hearing from people that I know with young children, they spend about an hour a day on schoolwork, and probably once every week or every 2 weeks they'll have a face-to-face interaction with their teacher. So it's just like, developing that online interaction a bit more and sort of, optimising that experience for young kids, and actually helping them all see their entire class. Because I know through family members and people that I know that a lot of young kids are really missing seeing their friends and having that interaction. So education is a big area with lots of questions as to how that might pan out. I also, in my role, looked after hospitality and events, which plays a big part in our employees building relationships with potential clients and existing clients. It's a lot about networking and that face-to-face interaction, and hospitality played a big part in that. So we'd have boxes at various venues like Ascot and Lords, or we'd have special large events at a specific venue, where you can really immerse delegates into the whole experience, and it becomes almost like a multi-sensory experience. So all of that's obviously very much going to change, and has changed, because there's research out there that obviously with COVID coming about, more than 70% of events were totally cancelled, and I guess the rest then try to adapt and put that online in the best way that they could. So for us, one of the theatres that we have a contract with, they obviously couldn't put productions on, we couldn't go and view them, so they put them online on YouTube. But then we also have the option for employees and clients to have like a private session with the artistic director of that play and the cast members, and to ask questions. So it was almost like a little private event online that works quite well. So yeah, there are a lot of questions and unknowns around that, but I can't see everything going back to normal. And yeah, so it's just going to be really interesting to see how that develops and where that goes in the future. There's one example that I found about bringing actually like a music event online and partnering up with alcohol brands. So it was Budweiser, Carlsberg, Remy Martin and Pernod, and they joined forces with the company and a music label to actually bring a clubbing experience online and directly into people's living rooms. And with that, they kind of introduced the option to order alcohol online and get it delivered direct to their door during the whole experience. And apparently there was an increase of 70% in sales as a result of doing that. So there's so many different options, and I think we just got to get really creative with whatever we do, and we need to kind of start thinking fast. There's been a lot of experimenting at the moment, but it looks like this is going to be life as we know it now going forwards. So on the wellbeing side, I mentioned about Reiki, which is an alternative therapy. There are lots of other complementary and alternative therapies like meditation, reflexology, yoga and all of those things. So that's just flooded online. I mean, there's no way you wouldn't find a class that you could do, most of them free, some of them donation based. So these self-employed people like personal trainers, etc., have had to quickly bring what they offer online, be that through social media, Instagram Live, Facebook Live, or YouTube. It's just been made widely accessible to everybody that way, and it works quite well. So yeah, there are lots of options there, but I also think that obviously everyone has come online for everything, for speaking to family and friends, for learning, for everything. And actually, talking about well-being, we do need to kind of consider how much screen time we've had. And I feel that there's a bit of a crash going on now, with everyone being a little bit fed up with how much online time they're actually having. So it's good to have a bit of a balance and really think about your well-being in that. So for me, I'm thinking, you may not want to look at the screen the whole time. So podcasts are a really good way of reaching an audience, where you can just listen without looking at the screen. So that could be interviews, it could be music, it could be meditation sessions, yeah, all sorts of things. But yeah, just a few ideas and thoughts there of things that have changed.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Andrea. I think that really highlights the creative approach that we all need to take now as we keep shifting the way we get our products and services to customers. There's quite a lot of comments coming in already, so I'm just going to ask two final quick questions, so one for each of you before we go to those. Deborah, another quick question for you. You talked a lot about the way in the potential that we'll need to plan for, which is that we may go back into lockdown, which is a concern that I also very much share. And thinking about the knock-on impact on distribution, how can organisations best plan for where the way that they distribute to customers, how that might have to keep changing over the next 6 to 12 months? Oh, Deborah, you're on mute. Don't worry, I do that all the time. Don't worry, go for it.
I personally think this is where we'll probably see the really transformative change over the next couple of years, as in this sort of, the proper sort of distribution, end-to-end distribution, and people rethinking their supply chain. So, I mean, if we didn't know already, I think one thing the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us is that we're very reliant on things coming from China, and we're very reliant on a continuous flow of things coming from China. And obviously this was really shown, wasn't it, with the PPE, lack of PPE, because a lot of it's produced in the Far East, and as soon as that's disrupted, we don't have very little manufacturing of that going on in this country. So I think what we will see over the next few years is a lot of these supply chains will get shortened. Because actually one thing that really struck me during this whole pandemic and the discussion about sort of protective equipment was how many middlemen were involved. It wasn't just buying it straight from the supplier. It was, buying it through one middleman, through another, and then it would come. So I think we'll see those supply chains shortening. I think we will become a bit less reliant on things coming from the Far East, from India, from China, but I think it's really difficult to pull back. So I think, if you listen to someone like Trump, the way he talks, you can just stop manufacturing, you just stop buying from one country and you start recreating it all yourself. And that's actually really, really hard to do. So thinking about an area like fashion, probably most of you are aware that your clothes generally are made in India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia. And, I know there are concerns about well-being and welfare and pay, but those are very, very specialist industries with very specialist workers with very sophisticated factories. So actually to try and recreate that in the UK or somewhere else is actually a very difficult challenge. So I think we will see some shortening of supply chains, but not much. In some industries, I think will be very, very hard to pull back to the UK. But what I think we will see is we'll see a bit more hyper-localization. So can everybody give me a wave or say reaction? Who remembers having milk delivered to their door by a milkman? Yeah, some of you will be too young, some of you will be of a suitable age. So one thing, I live in the countryside, and we've seen kind of a resurgence in the milkman, for want of a better word, during this sort of pandemic crisis. So suddenly local dairies and butchers are back doing kind of door-to-door deliveries, and people are buying much more locally in a way that probably hasn't happened in about 20 years. I can remember the day supermarkets were allowed to sell milk for the first time, because that was, everyone was saying, was the death knell of the milkman, which it did turn out to be. So I think we're going to see a bit more of this sort of hyper-localization. So some things will move to being very kind of locally driven, but we'll still have some longer supply chains. And I think some of the trends we'll see are, again, it's about an acceleration. So some factories and manufacturers have been very slow to embrace robotics. But hey, a robot can't get a coronavirus, right? So I think we'll start to see much more, push forward on things like robotics, on, the firms that are choosing to ignore AI. What can you automate? What doesn't rely on humans? What can we do without a human being involved? Because the human is the weak link in the chain. So I think we'll see more of that. And one of the thoughts I've had in my mind, particularly about distribution, is that we will. Is this going to be the thing that pushes us into accepting delivery by drone or accepting driverless cars? Who would be willing to have a pizza delivered by drone to their front door? Anybody? Oh, we've got San Martin. Yeah, we've got a few people give it a go. So, for some people, that's a huge leap. Drones, there's lots of safety issues, privacy issues. But I think actually some people will use this pandemic as a kind of an excuse to really drive forward on that sort of technology. People are obviously very nervous about driverless cars, but hey, a driverless car doesn't have a driver who can get COVID-19. It can just go as long as it it gets, as long as it's got fuel in the tank, as it were. So I live in a third floor flat. Drone delivery of pizza would be ideal, says Richard. Yeah, can come in the window. That would be very exciting to see. So I think we'll start to see some of those things. I'll also ask another question. Who can remember the last time they paid for anything with cash? So I think, you know, I actually paid for cash this weekend and I was so surprised. I was like, oh God, my purse. I actually was surprised I had my purse on me, because I've stopped paying, you know, particularly, you know, it's got very accelerated during the pandemic again. So, you know, I think that's another kind of an area of the sort of distribution, the supply chain. So I think cash is going to continue to dwindle, and we'll see more kind of micro payments through phones and things. And that then raises really interesting questions about who owns your identity. So at the moment, you know, Apple knows it's me. Google also knows it's me online. You know, so I mentioned tech giants earlier, and they're all kind of competing to be the person who's got the definitive profile of you. And I think we're going to come on a bit more of that. Who we've got? Athena saying she still likes cash. Yes, certain countries are very cash heavy. Germany, interestingly, is I think one of the most cash heavy countries in the world, which is some people think that's a legacy of the hyperinflation in the 1930s. So I think we're going to see some of those things in terms of, you know, people when they start to think about how to plan, you know, they need to be planning around, what does my supply chain look like? What does my delivery look like? Have I got the right payment mechanism? What's my balance between just-in-time delivery versus stockpiling? Great comment from Paul. Currys are going to need some big drones. That's very true, Paul. That will be a hell of a drone, won't it? It'll be virtually an aircraft carrier. We'll get in there. So, you know, what's my balance between just-in-time deliveries versus what I need to stockpile? So, for I think the past couple of years, a lot of the big retailers like Amazon have really got used to kind of just-in-time working. So, you know, Amazon, I mean, if you've never looked up how an Amazon warehouse works, go and see if you can find a video, go and see if you can find an article. It is fascinating, because Amazon doesn't even have it just shoves anything in the nearest place in its warehouse. It doesn't have a logical system in there because everything's labeled and automated. So it doesn't need to have a place for the toothpaste. It doesn't need to have a place for the books. They just go on the nearest shelf because everything is continuously moving in and out. And I think that is really going to be challenged with this. So we are going to see more stockpiling, particularly of certain things, and that will really challenge some of the supermarkets. And I would say I personally think the supermarkets have done quite well on the whole during this pandemic. You know, there's not much they can do about us all rushing out and buying 100 toilet rolls, but you know, by and large, the supermarkets have kept the doors open, they've kept goods flowing through, they've tried to keep us protected. But if you look at someone like Aldi and Lidl, I don't know if you know how they manage to keep their goods so cheap, but one of the reasons is they don't care if they ever buy from a supplier ever again. So they will buy a load of stuff one time from a supplier, and it doesn't bother them if they can get it from that supplier again. If it's cheap, they'll get it in. Whereas someone like a Tesco's or a Sainsbury's will want to know, well, can you supply us for the next 20 odd, you know, can you supply us for the next 2 years? We want a 2-year contract with you. Whereas Aldi and Lidl will be like, it's a bargain, we'll have it, we'll take it. So I think supermarkets really thinking that kind of just, you know, the balance between what needs to be just in time versus kind of stockpiling, and also us as individuals, because we've all got used to kind of, you know, Amazon Prime, next day, you know, 1 hour delivery in London. You know, and are we going to have to start thinking about, you know, things taking longer to get to us now? So I think those are some of the areas that people really, really are going to have to sort of think about their distribution.
That's so helpful, Deborah. Thank you lots there about the rise of technology, but also where there will have to be some changes in customer expectations. Building on that, Andrea, can I come to you for the final question before we go to Q&A? There's so much stuff going on in the comments, which is wonderful. Keep it coming, everyone. Andrew, you made this brilliant point earlier about innovation and thinking about how you can do that, whether you're a small business or whether you're a larger organisation. Do you have any tips for organisations about how they can look at their distribution in an innovative way, perhaps if they don't have a great deal of budget at the moment?
Yeah, it's just, I guess, making use of all the digital touch points that are out there, and seeing what one's going to work best for them and their business. And it's actually making sure that they're giving customers what they need, and being authentic in that, and really optimizing whatever platform they use to make it really work. I think with employees is something I was going to talk about. I agree totally with everything that Deborah has said. It's all very interesting stuff. Just the issues around engaging employees during this time, as most of them are working from home, and the different tools and platforms that can be used to do that, to ensure that there's some kind of collaboration and connection. And for us, we've introduced Yammer, which has proved really effective to keep in touch, to share stuff, and also with our quizzes that we do, like weekly quizzes, we've introduced Mentimeter, so that we can see how each other's doing. It's quite fun, and you can see if you're first, second or third, and then who's overtaken. But it's just finding interesting ways to engage employees during this time, and to actually effectively operate as close to business as normal as possible for both clients and employees. And doing that may need like a lot of investment, digital transformation, and a lot of companies may not have been prepared for that. Some have, and maybe just testing and going through that experience now, but may then need to actually invest to improve their services, both to employees and clients.
Thank you, Andrea. That's brilliant. So really bringing it back to the experience that you're giving people, whether it's employees or whether it's customers as well. Fantastic. There's so much there. Gosh, I could talk to you both all day. I feel like I'm learning so much. But I want to give delegates the chance now, because there's so much going on in the comments, which is wonderful. Does anyone have a question that they would like to ask Deborah or Andrea? Please do raise your hand, or you can also raise your hand digitally as well, or you can even put a question in the comments if that's easier for you, just in the chat box there. But now is your opportunity to ask questions of our two wonderful experts today, so please do go for it. Who's got a question they'd like to ask? Oh, Richard, you've got a question. Richard, why don't you kick us off around the PR and comms?
How will COVID impact PR and comms and brand building type issues? Is the post-COVID world or post-wave one COVID world different to the pre-COVID world?
Excellent question. Deborah, do you want to kick us off with that one?
I was reading something absolutely fascinating about COVID and brands last week, and I would share the presentation if I were allowed, but what it was basically saying was about, I don't know if anyone remembers a guy called Simon Sinek. Actually, he's still going, so I don't know say why, but everyone's heard of a guy called Simon Sinek, and he did this very influential video, I think in about 2008, called something about companies needing purpose, and it was about the why. You know, every company had to express its why. And over the past 10 years, you've seen every single company trot out a purpose, and it's got so dull, and it's got, you know, and these purposes, you know, they were like the vision statements of the 1990s, you know, it was the purpose statements of the 2010s. And what this presentation was saying is that businesses need to move their brand from being, what's my purpose, to being, how do I serve you? So actually businesses need to really think about, you know, not the why of what we do, but actually what it is that they can do to help people and offer value to people and see themselves as in service of their customers. So I know Paul's put in the comments that Simon Sinek is still going. Yes, he absolutely is. Sorry, he is. That's why I said, I don't know why I said it, I don't know why anyone remembers him, because he is still around. So I thought that was a really interesting way of thinking about a brand, you know, the move from purpose to service. And are the brands that we take out of this the brands that we think more fondly of, after the COVID-19, the brands that have actually really done something to help us. So I definitely feel much better about supermarkets than I did, because I genuinely think they have really tried. I feel more positive about my bank than I did before, because, you know, it's quite nice being offered a mortgage payment holiday and things. So are we rethinking some of the brands that we rethinking our attitude to brands because they are the ones that have stepped up and helped us? So that's the sort of, I thought, was a very interesting perspective on branding. I won't pretend it's mine, so that's that wasn't my idea, but I think it's a really good way of thinking about it. Oh, sorry, Jack's asked a question about Brexit.
Oh yes, big question there. Should we do you want to take that one as well, Deborah, and then we'll come to you, Andrea, on comms, and also some of your thoughts on Brexit too?
I was going to talk a bit about Brexit, and then I just thought, no, I will wax too lyrical. I think food production is going to have a huge problem around the coalescence of Brexit and COVID-19. So I think particularly the farming industry and so forth, I think that's going to be a real challenge, because, you know, COVID-19 is going to require our farming industry to rethink its kind of hygiene procedures, you know, fruit washing, vegetable washing, all that sort of stuff, in order to get them to us. But at the same time, we've got Brexit, so we've got fewer workers coming over to work in our farming industry, and the UK has just signed, working towards signing a deal with the US where we'll lower food standards, or we'll accept food of lower quality from the US. So we've got these sort of odd kind of all these kind of things that are sort of feel like they're clashing in the middle, and that's going to be really tough to work around. Sorry, can I just respond to one of the comments about modern slavery? When I said about, someone said that I was denying that there was slavery in Southeast Asia in clothing production. I didn't say that at all. I said I'm just going to put those concerns to one side, was what I actually said, and said the factories themselves are kind of quite often quite modern and sophisticated, and it's a very sophisticated industry, and that is difficult to pick up. But I did specifically say I'm not going to address the concerns about well-being and pay at the moment. That's what I was saying, was it would be very difficult to move something like clothing, in part also just because people are paid so badly as well, but as an industry as well, you know, you'd be very, very surprised. I mean, I lived in Sri Lanka for 2 years, so I've been into a lot of garment factories. You'd be very surprised how modern and how sophisticated they were, and that was 20 years ago. And I'm not saying that people are treated well, but I think you'd be surprised at the environment. All right.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you for picking that up, and also your thoughts on Brexit and around PR and comms. Andrea, can we come to you on those points? So be interesting to hear your thoughts actually on how all of these changes are going to impact PR and comms.
I think I kind of mentioned it before. I just think, and as Deborah said, brands really need to think about what it is they're offering customers, and is it addressing the customer's needs, and the things that, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's like what's the most important layer. And especially with COVID happening, I think it's a lot around security, obviously health and well-being, and safety, and just making sure that they're addressing all of those things and communicating that in an authentic way, and being empathetic in their communications as well. So yeah, all about adding value in the way that the customer needs and wants it, basically.
Thank you, Andrea, and really making sure that approach is reflected in the PR and comms. I think that's a really good point. Excellent. So we've got a few more questions coming in. So we've got one from Biddy here. Biddy, do you want to ask your question about the touch points? I think that's a brilliant one.
Yeah, sure, and it's to both our panelists. In terms of the learning experience that we're trying to deliver online, would you say that those digital touch points, is there just one system that would provide that, or do you think it's going to be a multi-sensory, multi-tech approach, which could, as you've already alluded to, that anything digital still costs the same, if not more, to actually get those learning experiences right? And if we're mixing the multi-sensory and the multi-tech approach, how will that help the distribution?
Do you want to kick us off, Andrew? Then we'll come to you, Deborah.
I think people learn in different ways, don't they? So yeah, I think I said earlier as well, just using different platforms to teach is very helpful. Things like people like to listen, so as I said, podcasts, or they like visual experiences, and it's just whatever you do online, it's making whatever system you're using easy to use. Like websites, for instance, need to be as a basic responsive, because lots of people use their mobile, so it's just thinking about the different devices that people use as well. So just exploring those different platforms and devices and adapting it to suit different learning styles.
And my sense here is that, I think this is kind of space that's still up for grabs. So educational publishers are a little bit caught between the stool of, do we try and own the platform, or do we just concentrate on the content? And I think it's leaning towards they're just focusing on the content more and more. In terms of the platform, I'm not aware of anyone really hoovering up in this space other than Microsoft is probably one of increasingly, putting its tentacles everywhere in this space. I mean, I've even seen adverts for teams and schools on TV, I think. I don't know if anyone else has seen those. So I think probably Microsoft is trying to get its hands around that kind of, let's be the vehicle through which all teaching can take place, because look at all these different things. We can do whiteboards, we can do chat, we can do polls, we can do lots of different things. So I think that's probably the closest player I can think of. But my sense is that the educational publishers have kind of retreated from this space, if I'm honest.
Okay, thank you very much. It's really helpful.
Thanks so much, Biddy. Thank you, Deborah and Andrea. That is really helpful. Thank you. So I don't know about you, but it feels like that Q&A went in the blink of an eye. So many interesting points raised by you all there, and lots of fantastic insights from our panel, Deborah and Andrea. Thank you. We normally at this point in the webinar just get you thinking, based on all the fantastic things that you've learned from the panel, to think about what you're going to go and do differently. So our question for you is, based on what you've learnt today, how might your approach to distribution change? So it'd be great if everyone could put their answers into the chat box. And seeing as we've got 10 minutes left, then I will come to a couple of you and find out a bit more about those changes that you're planning to make. So off you go. If you could post your answers in the chat box about the changes you're planning to make to distribution after today, that would be brilliant.
So the quality of the comments and the questions is unbelievable.
They're really good, aren't they? I think everyone's worked so hard today. Thank you. Jubril, if we could save the comments as well from the discussion, that would be great, because I think there's so much wonderful stuff here. I imagine lots of you are still typing away, but is there anyone who'd like to share an example of change that they're going to make to distribution whilst everyone's still thinking? Oh, Biddy, you've got a great example here about Zoom versus Teams. Do you want to say a bit about that?
Yeah, so far our explorations of putting our content online has been very much about, is Zoom better, is Teams better? And rather than now looking at which is better, the multi-sensory, the multi-tech approach is the approach that I'm going to start exploring, because it has to be an integrated communication channel from what our panelists have suggested. So that's one of the changes in the way I've approached my research, that I'm going to change my mindset of thinking.
That sounds brilliant, Biddy. So really staying close to the learners and thinking about where they're at and the different platforms and experience that are going to work for them. I think that sounds fantastic. Shakira, you've got a fantastic comment here about social media campaigns. Do you want to say a bit more about it?
Yeah, so I think one thing that I've really sort of learnt from this webinar, as an apprentice in PR and communications, I'll sort of make sure that when I'm starting a new social media campaign, especially during COVID, a lot of our Instagram is sort of, oh, look what we're doing, we're giving out food parcels and things like this. And instead of that, sort of thinking what our residents actually want to know and what they'll sort of, rather than saying, oh, we're giving out food parcels, instead of that, thinking, well, how can people get involved in receiving a food parcel or something like that? So rather than boasting about what we're doing, making sure that our residents have access to that first. So yeah.
Sorry, had myself on mute there. Sorry about that. Shakira, I think that's a brilliant idea, because for me, that's all about where you're changing your content, you're flipping it to be about the experience of the user rather than about the organisation's experience. So such a good point. Thank you for that. Richard, a final comment, I think, from you, that would be great. I love this point about the digitally appropriate structures. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Sorry, unmute. Yeah, we've been in a situation whereby we've done what we've had to do to cope with COVID and lockdown and everyone being remote. In the future, we need to redesign our programs to work better with the tech, because what was done before and is now done the same as it was done before, but remotely, is not necessarily the best way of using the technology. So is a full day masterclass still the way to do it, given everyone's on Zoom? Can everyone stand at 7.5 hours in front of a screen, or should it be an hour, then an activity, and then another hour? Or there are other structures that might be more appropriate in a digital world.
Thank you, Richard. That's a really good point there. And in terms of organising experiences around those needs, there's lots and lots of really interesting free stuff over on the Government Digital Service site, where the Government Digital Service have done lots of really interesting service design work over the last few years, and they've just shared all the manuals and all the templates for how they did it. So I think that's useful for any organisation that's having to rethink how it distributes. And then, Jamie, can we come to you? You've written a fantastic comment here about some of the changes that you've made. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Yeah, basically, I mean, we've already made the comment. Really is just saying that we've already had to adapt very quickly as a social housing provider to the situation. So we provide, we obviously provide houses to people, and that's our core business. But then a huge part of that is also maintaining and repairing houses for people. I think, I'm not sure what the exact figure is, but it's around 50,000 repairs we carry out every year. So it's quite up there. And as soon as this kind of struck and lockdown happened, we had to go to a emergency only service, basically, and we had to get the messages out around that and make sure people were familiar with that. But then the second point really is just from what Shakira said, because that's exactly what the conversations with my manager have been, and it's basically just, it's not patting ourselves on the back about everything that we're doing. It's more about, look, this is what we can offer for you at this time. This is how we can bring value to you, especially with what's going on. I've just been working on recently, actually, our magazine that we send out to tenants digitally. And that's got a lot of stuff in there about, like, things for kids to do at home, or e-learning, things like that, or sprucing up your garden or recipes at home, stuff like that. So all stuff that's kind of relevant to our tenants at this time, rather than just saying, you know, a big PR kind of thing where it's just, you know, look how great we are. We're also doing food parcels as well, but it's not always about just saying how great that is and how many people we're supporting through that. It's about trying to support even more people. So yeah, very, very similar to what Shakira said, really.
That's a great point for us to finish on, Jamie, because I think you've raised this fundamental question about scale. So as we rethink what distribution looks like for all of us, and if we've got something that really works, how can we then scale that to reach more people? Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for today, everyone. I can see we've still got comments coming in on the chat, and I wish we could have even longer to do this, but I'm conscious that lots of you will have calls that you need to get to at 1 o'clock. I hope that you've all enjoyed this discussion as much as I have. I feel like we've all learned a lot today, and so much of that is down to our wonderful panelists, Deborah and Andrea. So thank you so much, Deborah and Andrea, for being so thought-provoking and really getting us to think about the topic of distribution and how it's absolutely being disrupted because of all the changes that we're living through, and how some of those changes could ultimately be very positive. So big thank you to them. Please do join us again next Monday. We will be looking at how COVID is changing messaging and marketing, and I know I've seen some of the panelists for that lurking amongst the delegates today, which is wonderful. So looking forward to that session. It will be at the same time, 12 till 1 o'clock next Monday, and if you do have time before that session, if you're coming along, we're going to be getting people to think about how the pandemic has changed messaging and marketing. So thinking about where that has applied to your organisation, and we're hearing from expert speakers as well. So thank you so much again to everyone, our wonderful panellists, Deborah and Andrea, for sharing their time and sharing their wonderful insights, and a huge thank you to all of our delegates, and thank you for being such an engaged audience. I don't think I've ever seen this many comments in any Zoom session ever. So this is wonderful, and I hope this leaves you feeling energized and excited for the afternoon ahead. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll look forward to seeing you for the webinar next time on messaging and marketing. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you again, Deborah and Andrea. Very much appreciated.